You're now listening to the Engage the Rockies podcast, your go-to podcast for local and state issues concerning Colorado.
Hello, Rockies. This is Sarah Jane Maroney, your host for Engage the Rockies, your go-to podcast concerning local and state issues for Colorado. Welcome to our Monday interview, and we will be speaking with Brad Miller. He was a teacher and a coach in California prior to his involvement as an entrepreneur who built and managed several businesses, including Public Policy Journal, a landscape management company, and a youth sports organization prior to entering law school. He served as counsel for several dozen school districts in Colorado, along with multiple ministries and nonprofits. He has 4 children that attended a combination of charter school, online, district school, homeschool, and private school. He and his wife, Ruth, enjoy skiing and hiking. Hi, Brad. Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity.
So we've read your bio out, and we know a little bit about you, but since we're talking about Title IX, can you explain why you're the resident expert, please?
Oh, yeah. So I'm part of a team, Miller Farmer Carlson Law. We're a small law group that we work almost exclusively with schools. Predominant part of our clientele is charter schools, but we also represent a dozen or so school districts, and historically have been doing this since about 2006. We've been at the center of the storm in a couple specific areas. One is around opening new avenues for choice, new types of charter schools, new authorization options, and then secondly, in sort of the debate and continually jostling in our blue state with issues of culture, right? So it's been everything from, historically about Planned Parenthood in Jefferson County, where I was general counsel, to, more recently things about gender expression and gender identity. So it's we've been involved in that stuff for quite a while.
Awesome. Can you, I'm going to sound a little ignorant here, but can you just even explain what Title IX is for me?
Oh, yeah. So from my perspective, I work in the school system, K through 12 education. There's 2 elements that matter to us. One has to do with an investigative process, and recently the Biden administration had imposed or adopted rules that were going to be assessed to schools that had to do with sort of blurring the lines around gender and identity for purposes of who could be a plaintiff or a complainant and a defendant in those sorts of things. And then there's the big sort of broad picture that is being expressed by the federal government recently, having to do with issues of competition in sports, and that's where Title IX emerged. In the whenever it was the 70s, where we were giving fair playing field for women to compete and be recognized, and everything from scholarships and opportunities, and so the debates reemerged recently. It has to do with gender expression.
Right. Okay. So there have been a flurry of executive orders coming out of this new administration.
Yeah.
There are quite a few surrounding education that do affect this, and there have been questions about that. Could you expound a little bit more on that?
I'm going to speak from the perspective of being in Colorado, which is unequivocally a blue state, as we use that sort of jargon, and Colorado, our legislature and our leadership have adopted protocols and statutes that purport to give children agency with regard to a lot of decision making about counseling and so forth. And then more recently, we saw the adoption of the anti-discrimination laws, new inclusion of gender expression and gender identity about 3 years ago. And then last year, we had this law that passed that people colloquially call the non-legal name change bill. And just like with Roe v. Wade, when there's a federal law in place and it gives certain rights, the states can't violate that. But when Roe v. Wade gets rescinded, then we have states expressing their own points of view and their own proposals. And in the same way, we have a situation where, in the absence of specific federal guidance, Colorado, like California and other states, have adopted rules that really purport to favor children's agency, which is a real big deal because we have traditionally understood in education that parents have the authority in their child's education, and this is a constitutional proposition or Supreme Court proposition where they've looked at cases and made decisions that parents are the authority, and so in many cases, kids don't have any rights absent what their parents dictate. Moving from one school to another, getting a special education designation or an individualized education plan, IEP, getting aspirin at schools, getting suntan screen for PE, all those things require parent consent. And so it's been really interesting in this non-legal name change debate. I just was looking at a headline from District 11. They're looking to adopt a policy. That's a school district here in El Paso County. And they say, well, we're going to make sure that parents consent before we recognize a non-legal name change. And their opposition is blowing up over that. Well, truth be known, it's a constitutional principle. It's very specific. And so notwithstanding what the legislature's tried to do, it is still the role of parents to make those decisions. And so we're in a swirl recently where, depending on your leadership, whether they have one orientation or another, they're going down very different pathways and declaring, in a lot of the Denver metro districts, that parents can't be told. And and they think that that's constitutionally sound. And I would say for my clients, there's no way that we could do that sort of thing without parent consent because the Supreme Court told us we have to. And so
have there been cases? Sorry to interrupt you, but has there been litigation surrounding those issues in Colorado?
There has been litigation. There's emerging litigation, and with your original question had to do with these executive orders, doing wonderfully, clarifying what the federal perspective is. I anticipate there'll be a lot more. It's a swirl, and we're talking today, Friday, and by the time somebody sees us next Monday, things might be different because the executive orders are coming so fast and furious. But it's hard to have clarity, and the clients I work with, we're struggling to just kind of keep up right now in a great way.
So in terms of that, like you said, you work in El Paso and you've done a lot with the school districts and whatnot. What should their policies be? I mean, obviously, the Constitution of the United States supersedes the Constitution of Colorado. They shouldn't necessarily be any discrepancies between the two. But then when you have other laws that have put in place by a Democratic legislature in Colorado, which then agreed with a formerly Democratic administration, they were in line. But then when you have a Republican administration, that gets confusing because you're going from pillar to post.
I've had some horrifying real world experiences because of this confusion. So, for example, it absolutely is the case in Colorado in the absence, like I said, a 10th Amendment freedom that Colorado has is to adopt a non-discrimination protocol that says gender expression and gender identity are protected. And then I bump that up for my clients. I say, well, yes, but in the case of schools, until the child's 18, it's still the parent's decision. And so on the one hand, we have the right to gender expression. On the other hand, we say, but it's monitored by parents, or it's authorized by parents. And I have a client school just very recently where mom and dad came in, enrolled the child, young child, second grader, and said that we're enrolling our child as a boy. And this is our decision, and we're the parents, and we get to do that. And they walk out of the room, and literally 30 seconds later, this little girl says, I don't want to be a boy. What a horrific sort of thing to happen. And so the confusion in the laws has really created some, very challenging dynamics.
Yeah. So how, I guess going back to all these executive orders, do you think the map is going to change significantly?
We are watching, again, scrutinizing these executive orders and kind of scrubbing them for what they say and what they don't say. And so far, the ones that have been most pertinent to what we do in schools have been cautious not to specify that state entities are subject to, these protocols. So there was the one about, that boys are boys and girls are girls,
Mm-hmm.
sex-based decision making, and it applies to federal agencies and federal employees. And so, and it goes to the extent of saying bathrooms need to be one or the other, and so on and so forth. So our local post offices will have that in place, but our schools aren't yet able, under that federal executive order, to follow suit. The newer ones are starting to lean in towards whether federal funding for education is tied to compliance. And these are the ones where I'm saying today, Friday, things might look really different Monday, Tuesday, as if we get what's her name to be appointed for the Department of Education, and then the Department of Education issues clarity around federal funding following compliance, and that's where we're going to really see some turmoil. The Denver school districts are going to be upset, and we're going to be elated, and we'll see how it goes.
Well, and I have heard people talk. I don't know if that's those that don't align with the administration fear mongering, but there's been lots of talk that President Trump will even abolish the entire. I mean, there's talk that he's going to abolish the IRS, right, abolish the Department of Education. I mean, do you anticipate changes like that?
Well, certainly, and that's way above my pay grade to know what he's actually going to do there. What we really are attentive to is that we particularly through COVID, every school had these special funds, these ESSER funds that came in to help with protocols around keeping people safe, ostensibly. And in an environment like that, almost everything was federally funded. So if they say federal funding is tied to compliance with our recognition of a boy is a boy and a girl is a girl, however it's expressed, then I think there's a real opportunity for schools to say, well, we don't want to take the risk of not getting the federal funding. And even though the state tells us they don't really want us to do this, I think it's the better course. One of the things that's really interesting right now is the last executive order talking about competition. And so we saw that the NCAA has agreed that they are not going to allow men to compete as women in women's competitions. And I saw an article in today's probably LA Times, but somewhere from California, the CIF, Colorado Interscholastic Federation, whatever CIF stands for, they said, well, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to continue to let boys compete as girls. Colorado, it wouldn't surprise me to see that CHSAA, our organization, makes a decision that we might not agree with. We'll see how that plays.
And would then others come forward and litigate and say, would you have more business because someone is saying, I don't agree with the state laws, but I do agree with the federal laws, and attempt to litigate that?
Yeah, God forbid I get more business. We are way too busy. Any young conservative lawyers out there, give me a call. We need help. But listen, there will be ongoing litigation. We have issues with the non-legal name change of compelled speech. So staff members, how are they supposed to comply with calling who, to them is obviously one sex and call them by a name that represents another sex? Is that compelled speech? So is that a violation? What about the other children and their modesty in a restroom, or their modesty and, and all of those sorts of things? So litigation is absolutely forthcoming. I work with a school district that conspicuously recently adopted a resolution proclaiming that it will only recognize boys as boys and girls as girls. It won't agree to permit boys to compete as girls in girls' sports. And that's a little bit of a stake in the ground, and one would think that someone might challenge that, and we'll see how that plays out.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
So, this does seem to be quite a difficult thing to navigate in terms of trying to figure out what the position of the school board should be with conflicting opinions there. What do you normally advise them? I mean, again, we've just had a change in administration, which is then contrary. Previously, it was aligned with the state viewpoint, and now it's contrary to it. So, I know that the DPS, I've even covered this in our Weeks in Review, where a DPS school changed a bathroom from female to all gender, and they were getting attention from the federal government about it.
I if I was to read my media, and it's the non-traditional media, you would think that I'm just a horrible disruptor that is contrary to all things good and pure, because I stand for the proposition that parents have the authority here, and that traditional approaches are the better approaches, and in it. And I know that I'm a little bit of a unicorn on my team. It's not just about me. All the guys, Tim, Bryce, Josh, everybody on our team, we really work well together on these things. But we will give what we think is not risky advice, to say, look, you do get to recognize parents' role in these things. And frankly, our peers in other law firms and representing other districts give their boards advice that they think is risk averse, and I think is maybe incorrect, and at worst, maybe even horribly incorrect. And so that might lead those boards into adopting policies that exclude parents, and that's going to get them in trouble.
And has there been anything that has come before the Colorado Supreme Court regarding those things that would give direction to the various boards yet? Any landmark cases here specifically in Colorado?
No, it's a great question. There's a federal case that was resolved at the district court level recently, Colorado District Court, that goes against the rights of parents, and I think that's unfortunate. And as I talk with I'm not a litigator, I'm a generalist, and as I talk with the folks that are involved in constitutional litigation, some of the big organizations like the ADF and so forth, they are suitably cautious that the composition of our state courts are not favorable, and so the pathway is long and treacherous, and it really would need to be a plaintiff who has the sort of resolve and maybe the resource to be able to get to the next level, to the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court, or those sorts of things. So not a real favorable landscape for this sort of litigation in Colorado.
And again, this is the Colorado government currently. It leans Democrat, or is Democrat, not leans, it is Democratic. Are there cases in other places where you have necessarily like a Republican House and Senate, state House and Senate, and a Republican governor that are going the opposite direction? Because we definitely have a clash here.
Exactly. And that's the sorts of things that we're absolutely exploring on a daily basis. I work with a school district that's being sued by the ACLU and the NAACP right now over books in the school libraries. And we do think we may likely lose in the federal courts here, but we want that case to be adjudicated, because there's one in Florida and one in Ohio and other places that are of the similar nature, that altogether might intrigue the U.S. Supreme Court to say, hey, let's reconcile this. And so that's an approach that we're very much exploring.
There's actually a bill being proposed right now in the Colorado legislature. It's called the library bill. Like, it's being, a shortened form name for it. I think it's a Senate bill, and it is talking exactly about that. And I wonder if that's essentially not backlash, but because that's the case, that there is litigation around this, then the legislature is attempting to enshrine those laws that would uphold that viewpoint into law here in Colorado.
I don't know that I'm going out on a limb to say that it feels like our Colorado legislature is actually acting against their own interest and doing things that have clearly been established by the majority is not in their interest. And it's, and yet they keep climbing down that pathway. I don't quite get it, but yes, they've been aggressive on this, and we'll see what happens.
Wow. Okay, so I guess it's all as clear as mud at this point.
Yeah.
What do you, as you check into your crystal ball, Brad, what do you see coming from the future, like future things? Should a school board be contacting you? Should a school board try to establish policies that sort of walk the lines of both those things? What should we be doing? And the last part of that, I guess I'll let you answer that first.
See, I think our communities and our school boards in particular, but the communities surrounding and supporting our school boards ought to encourage them that they don't need to be myopic and just reside in the sort of conventional advice they're getting from their administration or their legal counsel and these sorts of things. And there's resources like us that can help them see a different approach to this and potentially offer clarity. I mean, I don't work with every school district we can possibly, but we're always amenable to talking to board members and helping them see a different way to look at this. And then their communities in public comment and in emails to the board members in terms of support, recognizing that these are all big bureaucracies and hard to pierce, giving them encouragement to continue to try to do the right thing. It's a very political environment. This is about our kids, so everybody cares, and so doing so with grace and sort of prayerful engagement and all of that really is helpful.
And I guess that was my second point, was what is a parent in terms of navigating this? Are you trying to choice your child into a different school district because that school district is more aligned with your personal values? What are parents meant to do in these situations if their parental rights are not being upheld?
So my brother-in-law is a state politician, a Republican, and he asserts that as much as people think that they're getting pummeled with emails and contacts, even they don't get a lot of communication from constituents. And so I can imagine that school board members don't really hear from their constituents unless there's really something acute, and it's their kids in discipline problems or something. And so just warm connection and thoughtful contacts, I think, really are meaningful, genuinely meaningful. And in terms of as a parent, there's part of me that if I was back in the child rearing years would be moving to Tennessee just like without a blink, because it is a hard path. And then I think of people like Jarvis Caldwell and Paul Undine and the people that are doing good work up there. And I see the trends and I'm hopeful. And I think if we stay engaged, there's a chance for a turnaround. Who would have expected a Republican federal administration if you asked the question a year ago, right? And so things can change.
Right. Okay. So there is hope ahead. Any final thoughts that you want to offer on this topic that, like I said, it's still about as clear as mud. We have lots to resolve and figure out in terms of the different viewpoints and finding. It doesn't seem like that there's a lot of middle ground, although that's difficult if you come from the different perspectives as well.
I think there's one clear hedge. And I think it's obvious and very genuine against the imposition of our legislature that purports to be saying we're going to take away the rights of parents and let kids do what they want to do. And that is that the U.S. Supreme Court has with clarity said parents are the authority of their child's education. And so any school district, any board can be confident that as long as we at least throw up the hurdle that we're only going to agree to this thing that you're asking, if both parents agree, that's safe, it's not risky, and it's very appropriate. And that will slow the roll at least.
Yes. Well, Brad, thank you very much for your insight on this. We really appreciate it. And maybe a few more executive orders from now, we'll need to talk again. We'd love to have you back.
Sounds good. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Engage the Rockies podcast, your go-to podcast for local and state issues concerning Colorado.